Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, we're going to be ranking every single rock-type Pokemon in competitive. If you guys enjoy this type of content and you want to see more like it, leave a like on the video and subscribe for more. With that said, comment your thoughts down below. It's the best way to engage with your guys' opinions on this, and I'd love to read them. And otherwise, make sure you're clicking links to the Discord and Twitter, both of which are in the description. These are the easiest ways to stay up to date on content, outside of course, the subscription button. And if you want to support the channel for a couple dollars a month, link to channel membership is down below as well. So with that said, let's really quickly get into the tierings. So the S+ is for Pokemon that are pretty much like the top 5-10 range in either the Natdex Anything Goes, the Sword and Shield Anything Goes, or the VGC setting. This is mostly because VGC is a standard tier. It only has a single format. Well, it only has a single restriction, I guess, because the fact that while VGC does typically sometimes unban Pokemon, it's never really something where we're gonna have multiple VGC ladders existing at once, so I'm just using VGC as a whole here. The S tier is going to be for Pokemon that are decent enough, but they're not top 5-10 in these sort of tierings. And not only that, but it could also be for Pokemon that are really good in the OU setting specifically. I'm talking about Pokemon like Landorus Therian level good, where they're so good that the meta revolves around them. Otherwise, it's for typically Pokemon that just exist and they're really decent, and you'll find them typically on a strong amount of teams in the Anything Goes, for both Natdex and VGC and singles, or for the VGC tiering, but you won't necessarily expect them on every single team. Probably a strong amount of them though. The A tier is going to be for Pokemon that these would typically be really good options in VGC, but they're not necessarily going to be like your top, well, not your top Cocos, like your Rillabooms, for example, but they'll still be really good options in my opinion, or they're going to be for Pokemon that are typically strong in OU. Again, Rillaboom is a great example there, to be honest. Strong enough in OU to where it's going to keep a consistent presence, but it's not necessarily going to define what makes an OU Pokemon. Maybe some really strong UU Pokemon that got banned up, Pokemon like Dracozolt, for example, might see a place here, but otherwise though, typically just OUs. The B tier is going to be for Pokemon that are really niche in OU, or they're really strong in UU. Talking about Pokemon like maybe Nidoking, for example, will be a great fit here. For the VGC side of things, this is going to be for really niche options, of course. The C tier is going to be for Pokemon where these start to only fall in the singles range. They're typically the RU sort of threats, maybe some NU stuff that's really strong. D tier is going to be for the NUPU sort of stuff, and F tier is going to be for either Pokemon that were intended to be fully evolved, which is very important for Rock. There was a lot of these for Pokemon that are NFE and noteworthy enough, or they're for fully evolved Pokemon that are so bad that they have to be mentioned somewhere. With that said though, let's start off with Hisuian Arcanine. So Hisuian Arcanine, I will say this is a pretty big wild card here. We don't entirely know its move pool will probably end up being in PLA, but it already starts off with a pretty decent one. I think truthfully what'll hold this thing back is the typing being Rock Fire, oh my god. With only a base 90 speed, I think that unlike something such as Colossal, without the strong way to boost the speed naturally with an ability, this will definitely hurt a bit in my opinion. Also, without having the Dynamax mechanic and not being able to just go for a 2x HP boost to pop a weakness policy easier on Tailwind teams, will also kind of hurt this thing a bit going into Generation 9. But even if we took this into the current metagame, I think it's outclassed by a lot of common Intimidators, stuff like Landorus Therian and Incineroar, both of which, while this would definitely put a lot of pressure on the Incineroar, I think it would just be outclassed for a Fire-type Intimidator. And as far as Landorus goes, it's just completely beaten by and outclassed by it. There's also a lot of other strong ground types in the tier, so I don't really think that Arcanine would have a huge place in doubles, but it could maybe be a really niche option, to be fair. As far as singles goes though, I think this could be a really strong NUPU option with a Choice Scarf, so yeah, we'll give it D tier. Next up is Golem. Golem, I'm going to give both of them the F tier, but I'm putting this one slightly above, solely because I think that the rock ground typing is slightly better for Golem actually, despite the fact that a lot of people might assume that it's going to alone Golem because the fact that it's a rock type that can pressure waters. I actually think that in hindsight that regular Golem is slightly better, and it's for a few different reasons. One, I think this pulls off Sturdy Set slightly better, and it's mostly just because of the fact that if we look at Golem Alolam's offensive options, we're looking at moves such as Thunder Punch, which is a little too weak, or Explosion with Galvanize, which means that you're not actually running Sturdy, which means that you're just gonna die to one hit because the fact this is 4 times weak to ground. Whereas Golem at the very least gets a really strong Earthquake off of 100 base power, which is really strong. Golem's offenses are also pretty decent already, and you could throw on a custom set a lot easier with Sturdy. So I think that regular Golem typically can justify its Sturdy a lot more with high base power moves. Regular Alolan Golem, well, Alolan Golem though typically does have to rely on the Galvanize to really make this work. So I'm going to put Alolan Golem slightly lower. I think that both though do just cave to a lot of other rock types. Though, to be fair, a lot of rock types are going to end up in this tier, and we'll see why as we go through. Onyx, this is only getting mentioned at all because it was intended to be fully evolved. Onyx is garbage, worst Pokemon on the list. Truthfully, I can make its own F tier, like an F- just for Onyx, but I'm not going to because it would be kind of pointless. Rhydon. Rhydon's a decent one, actually. Rhydon, in my opinion, is actually a pretty strong rock type. If we were to look at Violet rock types, in my opinion, Rhydon's the only actually noteworthy one, and it's typically ended up in PU settings, though again a lot of Violet users have fallen off this generation because defensive options now not only have leftovers, but they also have boots, and typically the longevity of boots around hazards has outclassed a Violet. I'm going to put Rhydon in the F tier, but I'm going to put it right below the Golems. While I think that Rhydon in theory has a higher ceiling than these two, I think that Golems being able to benefit off of boots would, if they were in the Sword and Shield metagame, these would, in my opinion, favor slightly better towards it, just because of the fact that they could be sturdy boots custom options, or just, well, either sturdy custom options or sturdy boots options, and make sure that they're guaranteed taking advantage of that one-shot hit, and then from there going for something like an explosion or a last-ditch stealth rocks. So I think these are two Pokemon that definitely do cater a little bit better towards the meta, albeit I think on paper that Rhydon would in previous generations have offered more. Regardless, I was still F tier. Omastar gets a D tier for a few reasons, albeit it's a really weak D tier. But Omastar does get access to Shell Smash, which is pretty decent. This is actually a really good Focus Sash Shell Smash mon, because you could actually partner this with something like Weak Armor and take advantage of it to get a +4 speed, which is pretty good. Or you can go for a swim option with Shell Smash and potentially take advantage of the Rain to get a speed boost, though I think a Weak Armor would provide a lot more to teams. Not only this, but Omastar also has some pretty good hazard options with stuff like spikes as well as rocks, which is pretty decent. You also get Toxic Spikes even, so it's one of those rare Pokemon that actually gets 3 hazards, which is pretty good. Unless your name is Smeargle, it's actually a pretty uncommon thing to really triple stack hazards. So I'm going to give it to Omastar. I think this actually is a pretty decent option, and we'll put it in D tier. Next up is Kabutops. Kabutops is another Pokemon I think is pretty decent. This is a cool Rain Sweeper, albeit I think it is definitely a worse option than Omastar. But I will say this thing is definitely in past generations, at least, which aren't really what I'm ranking off of here, but in past generations this has actually carved its own niche as a pretty strong option, and in theory this is actually a pretty decent option for BDSP, actually, in my opinion. Specifically because of the fact that BDSP is a lot less hazard removal, so this ended up managing to carve its own niche actually as far as the RU tier, which Omastar did too, to be fair. I won't act like that's some hard thing to do, but I do think alone that the BDSP option 2 have a rapid spin option for Rain, and in theory this could partner with Kyogre and BDSP. It's all theory mon at that point, but it's enough truthfully with how bad the rock type options are going to get to, in my opinion, keep it out of F tier. Next up is Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl's a strong C tier, actually. This is a really strong NU option as far as just general Pokemon goes. But if we also look at the BDSP side, it's ended up also getting banned from NU, so it's again another one of those like RU style, like RU NU sort of Pokemon. Aerodactyl also typically has a lot of viability in Ubers, at least as a niche option, because of how fast it is. You could typically go for a fast taunt set with this and go for stealth rocks, and you could typically get a lot of mileage out of this. In fact, it's so decent in the Uber setting this generation, there's actually even a sample team around it, which isn't even new for Aerodactyl either. This is actually typically a Pokemon that will have at least one team built around it, whether it's a sample or at least it's a very just noteworthy enough team that's not a sample. But in this generation, it happens to be Stealth Rocks, Taunt, Defog, Rock Tomb, which pretty standard for Aero and Ubers in all honesty, but it does have an actual niche in these upper tiers, and it's still, again, that RU-NU sort of range, so I am going to put it in the C tier for this tier list. Mega Aerodactyl, though, easy A tier. The speed boost truthfully does help a lot, because Aero is sitting at a really high, fast Pokemon checkmark. The 130 speed tier, typically, whether you're playing Ubers and you're competing with stuff like Mewtwo, or you're playing in the OU tier and competing with stuff like Coco, is a pretty contentious speed tier, and Mega Aero now hitting 150 is actually pretty huge for the Nat deck setting. This does allow Aero a lot of different benefits. For example, you are able to outpace Pokemon such as Coco, Weavile, Ashgren, and forced priority on Ashgren at the very least, if not just random Scarfers, which, speaking of, random Scarfers need to be pretty decently fast. They can't be in that base 80 range anymore. I think they need to hit around like 88, I want to say, is the speed tier they need to hit. That sounds about right, but I can't really remember offhand. It might even be a tiny bit slower. The point being, though, is that Aero does put a lot of pressure on common Scarfers to actually make sure that they're really obnoxiously fast and forcing them to run like a plus speed nature. A couple of the ones that I could think of that would just naturally outpace it in the OU setting though, which is why it's in the UU tier versus OU, would be stuff like Cortana. So it's definitely in the lower end of A tiers in my opinion because of how fast these common Scarfers are. Even Greninja is typically a pretty good Scarfer in this tier, and that's another really obnoxiously fast one. But Arrow could in theory actually do pretty well in this tier. It has coverage for a lot of different Pokemon such as Victini, Volcarona, well, not coverage, stabs that hit these Pokemon, as well as stuff like Komao, Megalob, etc. So you could definitely get some good mileage out of Arrow, but it's definitely outclassed as far as Megas go. Still one of the stronger rock types though, definitely an A tier.
Moving on to our next Pokemon, we do have Sudowoodo up next. So Sudowoodo is kind of an interesting one. Really, it's just a terrible Pokemon actually, just worse Golem. I will say though that the option for Rockhead is in theory good. The issue being though is you would need to basically get Sudowoodo up in Trick Room to then use Head Smash with Rockhead, and there's better options to do it that hit harder and also just have better typings to get more out of just being then a pure rock type. For example, we have Pokemon like Aggron, which at the very least it's also a steel type, so it does have some defensive merit. Also, Aggron could in theory take advantage of body press sets. It has just a much wider coverage pool, and it still gets Head Smash. So what does this leave for Sudowoodo? Sudowoodo definitely gets low on the F tier. I'm putting it above Onix though. Nothing will get lower than Onix in this list. Well, I said that and I already found a Pokemon. I'm gonna skip ahead a bit. Nosepass is the only other Pokemon that will get worse than Onix. Nosepass, again, it's literally just intended to be fully evolved, and it's just a more disappointing Onix, truthfully. Because of the fact that at least Onix, if nothing else, has a higher defense stat and it has a second stab that's pretty useful. But oh my god, these Pokemon both suck. Both are F tier. Next up, we have Shuckle. Shuckle is pretty decent. This is actually, again, similar to Arrow. This has a lot of higher tier niche, albeit in this generation, it's definitely been less desirable because of stuff like Heavy Duty Boots. I still think a Shuckle is pretty decent, but unlike Arrow, though, it's definitely held up a lot less power creep. Still going to put it in the D tier, and I'm putting it above these two. I think a Shuckle has, between the Sticky Webs and Stealth Rocks, it's pretty decent as far as BDSP standards go, in my opinion at least, solely for the fact that Shuckle doesn't have to worry about boots in that meta, though albeit, again, a lot of teams have definitely opted for other hazard setters, to be fair, but Shuckle is one of those Pokemon that would have a soft niche, even as far as just tiers like BDSP, UU, RU, etc., which is something that Omastar and Kabutops, they're just kind of there, they're kind of existing, albeit they're really good in their RU tier at the very least, but I do think that Shuckle has the potential to be more useful in higher tiers, and I think as a general Pokemon, well actually no, that's a lie, because I was gonna say it offers more, but these two also offer Rain, which is actually pretty good. I'm gonna put it right below them. Magcargo is fucking terrible. This will probably be the lowest ranked rock type that it exists in the F tier besides the joke ones, or the ones I had to list because they were intended to be fully evolved. But Magcargo is fucking horrible. Rock Fire typing with base 30 speed, it's just what Cold shouldn't have been, and Colossal is what this Pokemon should have been. But realistically though, this mod has barely any coverage. Its utility is decent enough to be fair, but when you're this slow, in fact, literally the stat line is just a weaker Colossal. I'm gonna bring up Colossal's actual stat line just to compare this. So if we look, Colossal, they both have 120 defense, then Colossal has about another 50 more HP, it has another 30 more attack, it has like 10 less special attack, which is really the only stat that Magcargo outclasses it in, and then also Colossal has another 10 higher special defense. So yeah, no, Magcargo just is bad Colossal, because Colossal also has Steam Engine, which is a lot better of ability. Its move pool is a lot better. It even has options for other ground types with Scald and Solar Beam. Well, to be fair, I think Magcargo actually gets Solar Beam. I don't want to dismiss it too hard. You know, we're already shitting on it a lot. Yeah, so this gets Solar Beam. I gotta give it that at least. It's still F tier. Corsola, at least this gets Regenerator. It's something I can say that is better than these two at least. Regen's a pretty broken ability if nothing else, but this is still a really terrible Pokemon realistically. I love Corsola. It's a cool Pokemon in theory. It has some good coverage actually, and it has some good utility. Hustle could make this actually do some good physical damage, and I've actually calculated out some options with this weirdly enough, with my good pal Perfected Blue, where this could unironically KO Arceus Fire, which is kind of funny to think about. I know Arceus Fire is not a viable Arceus, but if you go with like a Hustle Head Smash set, you could in theory do it, which is kind of cool. But still a really terrible Pokemon, just it's kind of funny, terrible Pokemon. And again, Regen at least is a really good ability. Also, Natural Cure is a pretty decent ability. This thing has 3 good abilities. I would say 2 of them are actually useful on its stat line, being Natural Cure and Regen. And it has some good utility with stuff like
For example, Stealth Rocks is pretty decent. You get stuff like Light Screen and Reflect. You could, in theory, I think, make Corsola work in a very niche scenario, but I don't think you could really do that with Sudowoodo and Magcargo, so we'll put it here. Tyranitar, easy A tier, literally one of the best Pokemon we're going to put in A tier, amazing OU staple in both Sword and Shield and Nat Dex. This is a pretty decent VGC Pokemon too, especially in the Spike Cup format recently. This has been an absolute monster in that tier, though this definitely is favored a lot more of the Dynamax metas, where specifically where Restricted's have not been around, because it's been a pretty good weakness policy Dragon Dance option, where, to be fair, it's still a really good Dragon Dance option in Spike Month, but in general, I do think that Tyranitar has been historically a pretty on and off Pokemon this gen, but it's definitely been on a lot of high points recently, and I do think that overall the meta has shaped up to realize that it does need Tyranitar. So we're going to put it in the A tier. Mega Tyranitar, we're going to put right below Arrow. This is one of those things where, similarly on the Dark tier list, I didn't think in the Dark tier list there was enough Pokemon that really made the difference. But I'm going to put it above Arrow, because if nothing else, as I mentioned in the Dark tier list, this does actually have a couple of benefits. One being checking Mega Latias, which typically can't really afford to actually run the coverage it needs to beat T-Tar, which is pretty good, because Mega Tyranitar naturally has a lot more of a special defense buff, which in tandem with point 2 being the fact that this is a highest protect Pokemon that also doesn't need to run a Assault Vest like Tyranitar does to check certain hits. It's pretty beneficial when you're trying to run a Stealth Rocker. So I do think Mega Tyranitar has cases where you would actually want to run Mega Tyranitar over regular Tyranitar, and it's specifically on teams that want the extra Spit F, but also want to run a Stealth Rocker on T-Tar. So I do think that they're a little interchangeable, but typically I would say Tyranitar has a higher ceiling in my opinion. Both of them are A tier. Aggron, truthfully, it's pretty decent enough this gen. Compared to previous generations, this has finally been a Pokemon that is no longer untiered, and to be fair, for good reason. Aggron has Sturdy with the Custap Berry, which, as I mentioned for Golem, if it was around, would probably make it tiered. This also has a Rock Steel typing, which means that it's only 4 times weaknesses are Ground and Fighting, which may sound really bad, but this also has good coverage for at least the ground types. The Iron Defense Body Press sets, weirdly enough, could work in low tier, and I think we've even seen them doing stuff in low tier, but I'll be honest, I genuinely couldn't speak on that. It doesn't look like they actually are, which is kind of funny. I genuinely would have thought that would have been what people used Aggron, but it does make sense, to be fair, that people are using Rock Heads as Head Smash. It's a pretty good breaker, especially when the tier typically doesn't have, outside of ground types, the best switch-ins to rock type attacks, which I know that sounds like, oh, just pick the one type that resists it really well and has a lot of good Fizz-Duff options, but there's also not a lot of good grounds as far as the PU tier goes. It's stuff like Claydol, for example, which has no sustain. You get in a Pokemon like Palossand, not even Palossand, stuff like Sandaconda and Sandslash, which also, again, have no sustain, and you could typically, there's a lot of Pokemon that handle grounds in this tier as well, so I think Aggron's decent. We'll put it in D tier. Low D tier, we'll put it above Shuckle, though. Lunatone and Solrock, these are terrible options, but I'm putting them above Corsola, and this is solely for the fact that I'm putting Solrock above because Solrock is the one that has this on slightly more occasion, but these have a weird thing of checking Pedon in a very niche sense, in a very gimmicky sense. They check Pedon and not XAG. It's the only reason I'm tiering them above Corsola. They're both terrible Pokemon though, but they weirdly do check Pedon in a lot of teams. I don't know why. Okay, I get why. I just don't know why Pedon lets it happen. Even still, though, a lot of Pedon do run Toxic these days, so it's not even like a super consistent check, but it can at least delay Pedon from being a monster on offensive teams, and a lot of offensive Pedons typically run Fire as their best attack to hit these two, so in theory, it could actually check. And they both do get coverage for it, actually. If we look at Solrock, for example, it gets Earthquake, and Lunatone will get Earth Power. I know they both do get both options, to be fair, but I did mention it because I was going off of what their higher offenses was. The point being is they're both F tier, but they're F tier with a really weird niche of checking one of the best Pokemon. I can't really take that away from either. Weirdly enough, too, they also actually get coverage for other grounds, like, for example, Ice Beam for Zygarde, but Zygarde does obviously have arrows, which neuters these, so yeah. Next up, is Cradily. Cradilly's kind of cool, albeit the one benefit this has is really just Storm Drain, which is pretty decent for VGC. So I'm going to put Cradily, I'm putting it right above these two. I think the niche to check Kyogre is actually something that's pretty decent, albeit Kyogre could definitely go for Ice Beam, though Cradily could also just go for Dynamax. And especially with Max Rockfall, you could actually clear weather for Kyogre, which is pretty bad for it. because Cradily would also be able to then go for a Sandstream, which would be really good for boosting its depth, making it check Kyogre even better than it already was. And then you can go for something Max Overgrowth, and you could weirdly enough Snowball Kyogre with this. But again, such a niche thing. I'm putting it in F tier just again. It's F tier with a niche, and I think the niche is more applicable to this gen than these two would be, because these two would literally only be checking in one format, whereas Cradily could in theory do it in multiple. Armaldo gets above these just because it's a spinner, and also the fact that Armaldo could at least take advantage of weather. They're all kind of just in this really bad sort of tiering space, but I do think that Armaldo, at least being a potential for spinner, is pretty decent for it. Also, I will say that the bug typing does help at least with offensively taking care of one of Rock's typical weaknesses, being the fact that it would otherwise be weak to grass hits. Solrock and Lunatone could do this similarly with the... well, actually, they all kind of do this, to be fair, so I'm actually not going to give Armaldo that. But I still think the spinner thing, if nothing else, this is an actual role it could provide on the low-tier team, which is more than I could say for these. It at least gives something to its actual tiering. Relicanth, I love Relicanth. Marcus, don't kill me for this one. Relicanth is terrible, though. Rockhead's pretty decent, though, and it also, again, similar to Aggron, does have the sturdy boots thing going for it. Just worse Aggron, in my opinion. I'm putting this in F tier, but I'm going to put it at the very least, just solely off of the fact this could, in theory, again, do a sturdy set, or it could do a rain set. I'm putting it at least above Armaldo, because Armaldo misses out on sturdy, and it also misses, well, it keeps Swift though, but it's also faster than Armaldo, and it also has a stab that can take advantage of rain, which is actually pretty decent for it. I'm actually going to put it above, no, I'm not going to put it above Rhydon. I do think that despite Violet being a lot more outclassed this gen, and the fact that Relicanth does have sturdy with boots to, in theory, take advantage, no, I'm actually going to put it above Rhydon. What the fuck? I never thought I'd see the day. This was like a counter team thing or a Gen 7 thing. I would have never done that. Rhydon would have been a whole tier above, because Rhydon was really decent in Gen 7 PU, but boots really do make a difference. Again, keeping a sturdy with boots for that one-time hit is pretty decent, and it's something that Relicanth could do that Rhydon could just die to a lot of special attackers, especially when a lot of good Pokemon have fallen to PU. So yeah, I can't even give it to it. Regirock's actually pretty decent. I'm putting this top of D tier. This is a really good sturdy option, and we've actually seen this even as far as Regirock with Clear Body being a really strong option with Dynamax at a certain point. This is kind of cool with Dynamax weakness policy for a bit, and I want to say Series 9 of VGC this had a little bit of a stint, albeit Registeel was a bit better, but Regirock had its purpose. I mean, you can go for Max Rock Falls and boost your Spadef. You had stuff like... I mean, Max Ice was pretty good for Lando matchups. You had stuff like Max Fire, which is good for opposing steals, as well as Body Press, which you could actually get some nice Phys Def boosts with Max Steel Spike, and then go for a Body Press and just start snowballing teams. Regirock is pretty decent, though. I gotta give it to it. Easy D tier. Rampardos, oh my god, I wish you were better. This has such a good attack stat, and in theory, Rampardos has the makings of a good Pokemon, but it's way too slow. I definitely don't think that Rampardos is good by any means, but Sheer Force is kind of decent. Weirdly enough, this has kind of an okay matchup with Rock Polish and BDSP OU, albeit it's really fucking niche. I'm putting it above Corsola. This is at least a good breaker. Bastion, though, I forgot Bastion existed. I'm so sorry, Macargo. I never should have said you were the worst Pokemon. Bastion really needed Body Press. If Bastion got Body Press, honestly, this could actually be a decent Pokemon. Until it does, though, this is just fucking terrible. It's way too passive, but its typing also sucks to be way too passive. Sturdy Boots, in theory, yeah, that'd be kind of good, but it doesn't really matter when you get, like, nothing off, basically. It's just really bad. This is what Aggron should never have been. Next up, we have Rhyperior. Rhyperior, I'm actually going to give a B tier to. I don't remember where I gave this thing on the ground tier list, I'll be completely honest. I'm going to give it a B tier, though. And I think that's mostly just because of the fact that I think this was a really good option as far as Trick Room goes this generation for VGC, and it's something that I think actually a lot of Trick Room Pokemon did definitely leave to be desired. Rhyperior realistically was an incredible snowball for Trick Room, and no, actually, I'm going to put it in C tier, but I'm putting it above Arrow at least. Definitely fell off a little bit as the generation went on, but early gen, this was an incredible option for teams, actually. With weakness policy and Dynamax, this was one of the Pokemon to truly be feared in VGC for Trick Room. However, I do think that a lot of other Pokemon did creep up to it. Stuff like Torkoal, for example, was an absolute menace. And I think that, unlike a lot of other Trick Room Pokemon, Rhyperior sadly didn't hold up as the DLCs came. It's still not a bad option, but I would say that there's a lot of better Pokemon, so like Glacier, even if we're not going to talk about Ubers, definitely stole the role as far as a Dynamax Trick Room option. And there's still a lot of others, to be fair. I'm not going to act like, there isn't a reason to use Rhyperior in Trick Room, because there still is, to be fair. It's a great breaker. It gets Rock Slide plus Earthquake, which is incredible stab. But Rhyperior definitely did get a bit outclassed, though still noteworthy enough to where I do want to put it in the C tier. Probopass is up next. Probopass, if nothing else, I'm going to give it at least in this sort of cluster, because I do think that despite being a bit more passive, it's not Bastion level passive at least, and Probopass, if nothing else, also does have Magnet Pull, which is pretty decent. Being able to actually trap opposing steals is really valuable for it actually, and this does get Body Press, which means it does have a way to really damage them, because it has a pretty high Phys Def stat of 145, which is really useful in my opinion. So we're gonna give Probopass that, if nothing else. I do think it's a legitimate thing. It does carve out over a lot of the other Pokemon in the F tier, albeit it's still really bad. It's kind of undesirable arguably, but it is truthfully a good niche this has. Easy F tier. Arceus Rock S tier, but it's solely because it's an Arceus. This at least though has 100% accurate special rock move, which is rare among rock moves, not rare among special rock moves. The typing in theory could do a reverse of what Arceus Ground does for physical sets and get the Edgequake off of the Stone Edge aspect of it for the stab, and then just throw on Earthquake, which could be good with Sword Dance sets. But it's just a worse version of Arceus Ground in literally every capacity, in my opinion. Still S tier though. It's still in Arceus. So next up we have Gigalith. Gigalith's a pretty decent sand setter, if nothing else. This is something that, in my opinion, has some decent niche in other tiers. But I will say it's definitely budget T-Tar in a lot of ways. While you don't need to necessarily run Assault Vest on this, you're typically running this as a sand Pokemon. And T-Tar's stab is also pretty good at checking Ghost at the very least. Gigalith only really has the one, which could be really good in a fighting heavy meta, but I do think at the same time that the metagame never really got to a point where it stopped appreciating T-Tar's dark typing at the very least, so I'm going to give Gigalith at the very least a C tier. It does have a couple niches such as Trick Room, for example. It's a good Dynamax Pokemon Trick Room actually with weakness policy, but again, it's something that, for example, Rhyperior could benefit from and do a little bit better because of the fact that it had the ground stab as well. And while Gigalith does obviously benefit from not being 4 times weak to anything and starting with the immediate boost to its Spidef with Sand, Rhyperior could still set that with Max Rockfall anyway, so I don't think it's a huge giving point, but it's noteworthy enough, and it's still pretty decent in singles at least, so I'm going to give it C tier. Crustl's up next. Decent Shell Smash option, but also sadly Crustle just kind of fallen off the power creep, albeit again similarly this is a boot sturdy. It has also a lot of hazard options it can give. I'm going to give it D tier, but I'm putting it above Shuckle at least. I'm putting it below Aggron purely because Aggron's actually tiered, Crustle isn't. Caragos is up next. Caragos is pretty terrible. It's really just another one of those sturdy mons that sadly is just a bit too slow, and it has Shell Smash, but it's a bit too slow to really make use of it. And unlike Omastar, it doesn't really have another ability that it could throw on to get the +4 speed or just in general a faster speed tier. Albeit Swift Swim does exist, but it's not as valuable as something like Weak Armor was for Omastar actually. So I'm going to put this in the F tier. I'm going to put it at least above the rocks, if nothing. Actually, no, I'm putting it at least above Rampardos, if nothing else. And it's solely because of sturdy. It's really because of sturdy. I don't think Solid Rock actually makes a huge difference in this Pokemon. The Spidef is way too low. And while you can make a case for that being a case for Rhyperior, I think Rhyperior is a lot better of a Dynamax option at the very least. I don't think Caracosta's typing really benefits it that sort of way. And also, I think that Caracosta just naturally hitting significantly weaker than Rhyperior does is definitely a huge hurt to it as well. So I'm going to give it F tier. Archeops I'm actually going to give the D tier. I'm putting it above Aggron for now. And this is mostly because of the fact that I think that Archeops actually this gen with heavy duty boots did divide its own niche. Also, not only just with heavy duty boots, but it's also got access to Meteor Beam, which is a pretty big buff for it. In fact, actually, I'm going to put it above the Kanto fossils. I think this is probably one of the best fossils we have right now. Being able to go for Meteor Beam sets, I think did open up Archeops a lot more because it does have a lot better of a special move pool actually with stuff like Air Slash, Earth Power, Heat Wave, Roost. Well, Roost is just another option. It runs on Heat Wave sets, on Meteor Beam sets, but again, typically between Heat Wave, Earth Power, Air Slash, this is a lot better adapted for lower tiers, though also with the addition of Dual Wing Beat, now physical sets also had a lot more viability. And especially with the fact that you're able to run an option with heavy duty boots without having to force an item slot on an acrobatic set is pretty decent for it actually. And I think this is truthfully one of the better generations archetypes has had in a while. In general though, definitely a really strong option this gen, and it still has the usual lead sets that it was running otherwise with just focus sash, taunt, rocks. But I think that in general Arcaps finally has more than just a one-trick pony as a worse Aerodactyl to run. Easy D tier. Terrakion, strong A tier in my opinion. I'm putting it below the T-Tars, above Arrow. Really, actually, I'm putting it below Arrow. Because if nothing else, Arrow is really decent as a Natdex Pokemon. T-Tar fell off significantly in the Natdex tier. But Terrakion has a lot going for it. In VGC, this had a stint as a strong option with Beat Up Whimsicott, where it was manhandling teams. As far as singles goes, it's a good Scarfer, it's a good Life Orb option, it's a good Choice Band option, and Natdex could run Z moves even. It's just a really good breaker, and it does everything that breakers do really well. Easy A tier. Next up, we have Barbaracle, really good Shell Smash option, and this is just what Karakosa should have been in my opinion. Barbaracle definitely, in my opinion, is a really terrifying option actually, and I'm putting it at the bottom of C. I think Barbaracle also, even just outside of Shell Smash sets, which it can do pretty well, this also has the option to go for a Choice Scarf set, which while significantly worse than Shell Smash, it could in theory do it actually, and its speed tier is really good at 68. It would outpace a lot of common things, and getting off a Choice Scarf option with stuff like Tough Claws, boosted. Actually, what's the Tough Claws really best for? I'll be honest, it's probably something like a Night Slash or a Poison Jab, or I think Liquidation's Contact. But even still, you do have a lot of options. X-Scissor as well would be pretty decent for covering grasses, which is 4 times week 2. Though again, Jab would probably be better at that. The point being is I think that Barbaracle in general does have a lot going for it, even just off of Shell Smash alone. This is an absolute nightmare. Easy C tier. Next up, we do have Tyrantrum. Tyrantrum's not terrible. It's a really good Pokemon in the lower tiers. This gets options such as, for example, we do have Choice Banded Tyrantrum, we have Rock Polish Tyrantrum. The typing is also really decent offensively, but outside of Rock headsets, which I know I said outside of like one of its best abilities, this could in theory actually run Strong Jaw though, and it has historically ran that on occasion. But really the only Dragon Boosts is running are Outrage, which is pretty decent, but you're locking yourself in, or Scale Shot, which is mostly just meant to be a speed boosting option while doing damage, which is pretty decent on Tyrantrum at the very least, because whether you're running it in tandem with Dragon Dance, which it doesn't RU, or just running it as a solo option to boost speed, it's definitely got its merit. You're typically not running Dragon Claw though, unless it's not a choice set. In general though, this has a lot of good coverage for weaknesses. For example, if you're trying to attack this with a Steel type, you get access to Close Combat. You could also well actually that's really about it, but Close Combat's just a really good option to handle steals that would otherwise wall its Rock Stab. I definitely gotta give it to Tyrantrum though. This is definitely a C tier option. I'm putting it above, well no, I'm putting it below Barbaracle, but still definitely a strong C tier option in my opinion. Aurorus on the other hand, I'm putting in F tier, but I'm putting it in the front of F tier. It's solely because of the fact that this is a really good breaker as far as low tier goes. Aurorus definitely though isn't great. I think that the biggest benefit this does get though is Veil, which did get banned. It was good enough actually to get banned even on just as a blanket move because Aurorus was a really good user of it. So Aurora Veil being banned in the PU sort of tier, I will give it. If nothing else, I do think that is merit enough at the very, actually, did Aurora Veil not get banned? I'm pretty sure this move did get banned on Aurorus, but I'm not actually seeing it come up when I do try and click the validate option. But I'm pretty sure, okay, so you know what? It was a little Sand Slash that got banned. Regardless though, I think the Veil, well then in that case, the Veil does give it an edge then to put it in the F tier. I was gonna say that it being good enough as a Veil setter was my case for putting it top of F, but just having access to Veil still put it at the top of F, because it does have that access in theory. And it did make a lot of other Pokemon more broken. Next up is Carbink. Just a worse DNC. I don't know. I think I'm going to put Carbink, honestly, I'm going to put it right above the Macargo, if nothing else. I do think at the very least, the Sturdy option is pretty decent, again, for a Boost Sturdy set, but I think that Sudowoodo, if nothing else, having a good offense is pretty decent. And again, this is the same utility that DNC does, and it's just a worse version of it. Speaking of, I'm putting DNC in the C tier. In singles, this is a lot better of an option in my opinion. This is really strong in the NU tier. The typing of Fairy Rock is pretty decent actually offensively, and this is a pretty decent trick room option. You also get stuff like body press sets. It's a good rocker for teams, and in general, this just is a good all-around option. It's even got access to Heal Bell, which Carbink does too, to be fair, but it's a really good Cleric, which is really unique among your rock typing at the very least. So DNC definitely does, it does a lot for itself in my opinion. This is able to take on a lot of good NU metagame staples. For example, if we look in the tier, this has stab to handle stuff such as Arcanine, Aerodactyl. You have stuff for Pokemon. Well, actually, Flygon no longer is in the tier, but it was in the tier for a while. For stuff like Passimian, though, Grimmsnarl, etc., etc. I could run through the whole tier, basically, but off of stabs alone, this handles a lot of it. And you get stuff like Body Press, which is great for Pokemon like Stakataka, though you also get Earth Power for that, which is probably a lot better because of how much weaker the special defense stat is. The point being, though, is DNC definitely can, in theory, handle a lot of different checks just off of coverage plus stabs, so I'm going to give it the C tier. Next up, though, I want to, now that we're done comparing DNC, I should probably go over Mega DNC. Easily one of, if not the best, A tier rock types. You could definitely make a case for this being S tier. I'm not going to necessarily make that just like I did with Fairy. I'm going to hold off on that. But still a really good option in my opinion as far as offensive fairies go. Definitely, in my opinion, one of the better offensive ones. And unlike with Fairy, the power creep is significantly less competing for this slot. And also, Rock is a lot worse mega options to where while Arrow and T-Tar are decent, they're not holding a candle to Mega Dancy because Mega Dancy is such a splashable Pokemon on teams, whereas with Fairy on the tier list, it was competing with stuff like Coco, Lele, Mawile even. It doesn't have the competition with Rock though, so this truthfully will probably be the highest A tier Rock that we have today. Maybe one or two get higher, but I can't really imagine a lot. Now we're going to go to back in order. We're going to have Sui and Avalugg. Sui and Avalugg is a weird one. I know for Ice, I definitely tiered this thing pretty decently actually. And it's mostly because of the fact that with Ice, this actually does have a couple of things going for it. For example, this is a pretty decent option on Trick Room teams. The typing offensively is also really decent. So I think I'm going to actually probably tier this thing, I want to say in the F tier, but I'm putting it above Horus at least. This could be a really good Trick Room option in my opinion, with Avalugg Hisui form, of course, having really strong just stabs overall. For example, you do get options such as Rock Slide, which is going to be great on Trick Room in this sort of speed tier with the stab options. You're going to also get options like Icicle Crash, which is, again, a really good well, actually, you don't get Icicle Crash, but its signature move was basically a stronger Icicle Crash, so if that doesn't carry over, Icicle Crash will. You even get priority, actually, with Ice Shard, which is pretty decent. Your Stealth Rocker, which is good. Strong Jaw could be good with Ice Fang, and it could actually give merit to running that over Icicle Crash, actually. Though, ultimately, I think this will probably run a sturdy set, and it'll probably be delegated as a Rocker, which is fine. But still, this has merit in my opinion, just it's not going to be super good. I will say though that one weird thing this does have is it's one of the only Pokemon that off of stabs alone could handle a lot of the top tier Pokemon coming back, which I'm not going to go over in this particular video. But if you want to know more about what this might be able to do in the Scarlet and Violet metagame, I highly recommend checking out specifically the VGC portion of my Dex Leak, the one that has Salamence and Arcanine in the thumbnail. I recommend that highly because of the fact that you will see a lot of the Pokemon that S tier sort of range, or the really top tier range with Pokemon like Arcanine, Salamence, and a lot of the Pokemon in that range, this has good stabs for on Trick Room. So I could actually see a merit where this does have a place in Scarlet and Violet. For now though, it's an F tier. Lycanroc Day. Lycanroc Day is pretty decent, I will say. Decent option as a really niche sand Pokemon. It's a really good Focus Sash lead. The 112 speed is really good. I'm definitely gonna give it D tier. I'll put it above at least this sort of range in my opinion. I think Lycanroc's natural speed being higher than stuff like Archeops is pretty decent for PU. Also, the coverage is insane, and unlike a Pokemon such as Archeops, it doesn't worry about its offenses getting weakened. Also, Steadfast could, in theory, be good, but I think ultimately, though, again, you're banking on Sandrush. Lycanroc Midnight, I'm going to put this in the F tier, but I'm putting it at the top of F tier. 100% accurate Stone Edge is really nice, but at the same time, though, you basically do need to kind of lock this into a Scarf roll, which isn't really great because it's really the only option you could run, and the speed tier is passable at best for Scarf. Also, the coverage isn't the best to run a Scarf set on, albeit it's a lot better this, actually, the coverage is a lot better this gen, I forgot about that. I'm going to actually put this in bottom of D. I'm putting it right above Shuckle at the very least. The coverage this gen that Lycanroc did get, stuff like Player Off and Close Combat, does justify a lot more actually running a Scarf set, because you could in theory run a set with like Stone Edge, Close Combat, Player Off, and Filler. Player Off would be a great option on fighting types, Close Combat would be a great option around steals, Stone Edge is just a great spammable option, and at that point you just throw on a fourth option that's just at least neutral around a lot of the common tier, or even Sucker Punch in general is really decent, so we'll give it the D tier. Lycanroc Dusk. Lycanroc Dusk is actually probably going to be one of our only B tier rocks. Holy fucking shit. A really good UU option, actually. Amazing low tier breaker. In general, this also can run some really good Endeavor sets. The coverage, again, just like with Lycanroc
for all the forms is insanely good this gen. And this is probably one of the better gens this Pokemon's had. This has all the moves that both Lycanroc Dusk and Midnight, well not Dusk, Midnight and Midday had for coverage, stuff like Accelerock for example. So I gotta give it to Lycanroc Dusk. It's just the good version of both Lycanrocs. It's the happy medium for both. While it gives up 2 speed that Lycanroc Day had, I think it'll manage because it's a lot better offensively. Easy B tier. Savali Rock, as a Savali type, this is fucking terrible actually, but Rock type is such terrible options. I'm putting it above Armaldo at least. Stuff like Parting Shot and Defog is really good. The coverage on this is actually really decent as well. So I'm gonna give it F. Shuckle on Meteor's up next. This is a pretty decent Pokemon in my opinion. I'm putting it above Crustle, and it's solely for the fact that while Meteor doesn't really have a Sword and Shield meta usage, I would say that I do think this would be a decent option actually in low tiers. Aggro with Shell Smash is pretty decent, and its bulk and shield form is good enough. You also can't actually status this Pokemon, as I say, and I move it to higher in this tier. This could actually have been a pretty good Pokemon for VGC standards, even in my opinion, and I think that it would have 100% gotten usage in that sort of tier. Not only this, but I do think that Minior as well, weirdly enough, again, it's one of those things that could perform in higher tiers, albeit at a very extreme niche level. So I'm not even going to really get into that. I don't think it really matters for the usage, but I think if it was around, it would take a great advantage of Dynamax, and I think it'd be pretty proportional how Regirock was. D tier. Nihilego. Nihilego, I'm sure that a lot of you guys are expecting me to put this in B tier. I'm not actually going to. I'm actually putting this in A tier. I'll be honest, I forget where I put this in Poison, but wherever I put it in Poison, if it wasn't A tier, I think it might have actually been wrong, because Nihilego does offer a lot to just competitive as a whole. This is a great trick room option for teams. It's a great choice option for teams. I just checked back now, and I did put it in A tier. Now that I'm done talking about where I put it previously, I'm putting it right below Arrow, right above Terrakion, and I think it's solely for the fact that this did keep up a lot better with the Natics power creep in my opinion, and also it's a lot more potent in VGC. It's a great trick room option in VGC, which I know a Pokemon with 100-something speed, that sounds really weird to think about, right? But Nihilego actually does run Trick Room in VGC, and it's a pretty decent option. You also get some good support in VGC on Nihilego with stuff like Wide Guard, for example, which is great. So it's one of those things where typically a lot of people think of Nihilego as a singles Pokemon, as a choice Scarf, choice Specs, or just a dual hazard option. But it has a lot going for it in VGC. Between Ally Switch, you get stuff like Wide Guard, you get Trick Room. This does actually have the makings of a... Well, actually, you don't get Wide Guard. I thought you did. Even still with Ally Switch and Trick Room, still really good options for it in my opinion, to where this does have a lot going for it in the tier. Definitely a strong A tier Pokemon in my opinion. Now, if we want to look at other Ultra Beasts though, we do have the Stakataka up next. And Stakataka would actually probably be our only other B tier Pokemon. I'll say right now, this is probably going to be the only other B tier Pokemon we go over today. Similar to Nihilego, this is an Ultra Beast that is really good in Trick Room this gen actually. So I'm definitely going to give Stakataka that, if nothing else. It's a pretty potent Trick Room option in my opinion, and I do want to acknowledge that. Really good with Body Press. It's actually also taken its place as a really strong option as far as the lower tiers go. Stakataka no longer just being the laughing stock of tiers like NU and PU because of its typing. This definitely does take advantage of stuff, despite not having Z anymore, of moves such as Body Press and Iron Defense, as well as just Stealth Rock, to where you can actually justify boosting its higher defense and no longer needing to run Lonely for this Pokemon to be viable. Easy B tier. Dreadnought's up next. Honestly, just worse Kabutops, but I think it's good enough to where it does mention a D tier, and I'm putting Dreadnought right behind it. The fact that its water move is sadly the max kind of sucks. You do have to miss out on the option to boost Rain. However, setting up Stealth Rocks with your max move is pretty decent. It's a nice compromise. It could in theory be decent on singles actually, where you could just click this on an already existing Kyogre Rain team, which I've actually done at one point, and it's a decent rock option at that point, and the stab, especially when boosted by Rain, could actually be pretty good. I think it's sadly outclassed by Kabutops. D tier. Colossal, one of the better D tiers. I'm putting it above Hisui and Arcanine, if nothing else. I'll be honest, I forget how I rank these in Fire. I feel this way though today to put Colossal above Arcanine, so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm putting it literally right above. And the Gmax I'm putting in the S tier. This is the best Rock type we have. I'm so sorry, S tier. You are no more. Well, S plus I should say. Gmax Coldo, literally the best Rock type we've been graced with. Bless you, Colossal. You're the one thing that gives me the ability to sleep at night. Gmax Colossal, giving Volcalith is an amazing option. Unlike something such as Charizard and Venusaur even, this is the one area where I could give Colossal over Charizard. There's not a lot of Rock types in the tier. Unless you're playing either Colossal or the occasional T-Tar,
there's really not a lot of other potent rock types. Everything else is kind of niche. Stuff like, for example, Sakataka and Nihilego, where they do see usage, but they're not incredible usage. It's not like the 5-10%. Or even the Pokemon like Incineroar being one of the most commonly used Pokemon. It's a 70% usage rate, and Charizard cannot hit it with Wildfire, for the overtime at least. Or for Venusaur, Rillaboom, Venusaur, Mungus, Ferrothorn, etc. all have incredible usage, and none of them get affected by Vine Lash. Coal doesn't have that issue. It's the one area where it actually does excel over those two, but still S tier. Power Spot, Stonejourner, F tier, but I'm putting it at the top solely because the Power Spot, it's an actual doubles niche, but it's still not a good Pokemon. Finally, Cleavor. Cleavor gets a solid A tier actually, and I'm putting it above Tracken at least. I do think in theory, Cleavor has the makings of a really strong Pokemon. In fact, if any mutuals are watching and you want to get a battle, let me know. I have a Cleavor team I actually really want to use before the gen ends. But Cleavor does in theory, I think, have a lot going for it with stuff like Sheer Force Rock Slide. It's a good pivot with U-turn. All of these things, by the way, are things that Scyther naturally does give it. So stuff like U-turn, Roost, Defog, all are options that this Pokemon naturally gets. Same as Swords Dance, Tailwind. All are just off of Scyther. You still do get options though, like Rock Slide, which is great for Sheer Force, though it's truthfully the only option that actually does take advantage of it, which I'm fine with. You still get a lot of other good coverage options, stuff like Close Combat, Knock Off, etc. So I do think that this is going to be a pretty good mainstay in OU. At worst, maybe it falls to UU, but it has a similar Nidoking effect where it's viable in OU, but it's just not a metagame presence. But let me know what you guys think down below. If you enjoyed this tier list and you want to see more like it, leave a like on the video and subscribe for more. Click the links to the Twitter and Discord if you want to stay up to date on future videos. And shout out to our channel members, of course, being Josh, aka Ultra Player, Mia, and Zeke0. Your guys' support is greatly appreciated. And if you want to support the channel for just a few dollars a month, link down below to that as well. But with that said, I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Until then, peace out, guys.